What's up, everyone? It's closing time. I'm Kelli. I'm your host, and I'm here with co-host Alex Thompson, and he's sitting here with my husband, Daniel Saw, who most of you may know, but not outside of business. So we're going to go a little bit deeper and learn more about Daniel's story, adversity, timing, collaboration, how it all worked out in his favor to build something really special. All right, Disa, tell us about, where you're from, how you came to live in Ohio. Tell us the whole story of Daniel.
Sure, yes. Well, I was born and raised in Brazil. I was born in Rio de Janeiro, and then my parents moved to southern Brazil, and I was raised in a city called Ponta Grossa, Paraná, which is a small town in southern Brazil. That's where I lived, from 1 year old until I was 16. And then finally we came into the United States.
What small town to you?
So this city was, it was a decent sized town, meaning that it was, population wise, it was around 200,000 people. More of a rural type town. My parents were both teaching agriculture, like soil science, at a state university in southern Brazil. And so it's more of like a rural type town in general.
How close is like the biggest city?
The closest city to Ponta Grossa was Curitiba, which is the capital of Paraná state. And that's about an hour to an hour and a half car ride.
And so you're in this tiny town. How do you find Ohio? How do you end up in Ohio?
My parents, through the university that they worked for, had the opportunity to move to Ohio as their university had a partnership with Ohio State, and they were able to continue some of their academic studies. I had the opportunity to come here. One of the main things that contributed to that is when I was in, my teenager years, probably wasn't the easiest one to deal with, for my parents.
I don't believe it.
And so was hanging out with some of the wrong crowd, getting into some trouble, drove my parents' car from time to time without them knowing. And I wasn't necessarily on a path where I had this great future or anything ahead of me, and my parents realized that. And because their university had this partnership with Ohio State, partly one of the reasons they moved was to kind of remove me from that environment and sort of give me a fresh beginning coming into the U.S. and taking this partnership, this role with Ohio State, and me being able to finish my high school here in Columbus.
You and I have talked about this before. You talk about how lucky that scenario is for you because the Brazilian economy and the jobs market and things like that, the fact that your parents were teachers and this relationship with the school was the reason you had that opportunity, because if they weren't teachers and they had some other job,
I would never,
to be able to
I would
afford
have
to
never
come.
been able to come here. I consider myself very lucky, certainly to be here. The opportunities in Brazil are not the same as they are in the U.S. When I first came, even though I spoke very little English, if apparently no English at all, right? If you were to track down any of my colleagues from high school, they will tell you that I didn't speak a single word, but I just had a great attitude. I knew that I was lucky. I knew that most people in Brazil don't get this kind of opportunity, especially if you're raised, middle-class family in Brazil where your parents, are raising children, paycheck to paycheck. Coming to the U.S. and being able to live here was never something that I thought could possibly happen. And so I was very lucky and, just very fortunate to be here.
You've been here for more than half your life, correct?
Yes.
And one thing I find very interesting about that is, we talk about a lot of things, not just, work. People may think we only talk about work, but all things. And
We just talk a lot about work.
Right. We talk a lot about work. That's very, very important. But, it's just anything, whether it's politics, whether it's something that happened in the country at that moment. A lot of times you'll interrupt and say, you know what? I'm just grateful to be here. Like, I'm grateful for the opportunities. I'm grateful for the safety. It's a really good perspective that you bring that not really many people I know can share that type of perspective with what opportunities we have and really safety and everything.
We're very lucky to live in the U.S., right? We're very lucky to have the opportunities that we have. I truly believe that if you have a dream and you do what it takes, right? Because it's not easy to accomplish anything, right? It requires a significant amount of hard work, but you can actually dream and you could get somewhere. And that was the case for me. I was always a dreamer, always thought something was out there for me. Never thought it was possible before I moved to the U.S. Seeing, even when I was 17, going to high school here, kids in high school had jobs, right? That would be impossible in Brazil because, first of all, there are no jobs for somebody who is 17 or even 18 or even 20 years old, right? Most kids in Brazil, they don't really get into the workforce until much later in life. And, a lot of times people live in their parents' home, in many cases until they're in their 30s in some instances, right? And so moving here and seeing kids working and saving money when they're 16, 17, 18 years old, and then going to school and being able to work and make additional money and save. And kids getting out of their houses, just having the ability to be able to move out of your parents' house at 18, to be able to go to school. I mean, that's very rare in any other country, and that's pretty much, the normal here. Anybody can do that, right? You can, whether your parents are going to help you with school or you're going to get financial aid, you're going to have the opportunity to go to school as long as you can, graduate from high school. So it's quite remarkable that level of opportunity is available, and sometimes we overlook that, and we think about all the crazy things, and especially like in the political spectrum, but we're really lucky.
And I love that perspective because that's one of the things I remember when I first met you and we were starting to get to know each other. You said to me, Americans just work really hard. They love to work. It's inspiring to see, like, from a young age, they teach their children independence. And it's cool to have a job. I remember when you said that, it's actually cool to have a job. And I thought, well, what do you mean? And you said, well, in Brazil, there are no opportunities like that. So you only have a job if it is super necessary.
Well, it's hard. It's really difficult to get a job, right? It's not that you only have a job if X, right? It's just that the opportunities are just not available. And when they are available, the earning potential is super low. Yeah. Right. And so I think what's really unique about living in the U.S. is that, one, you've got the opportunities, right? And two, when you get an opportunity, you can actually, if you perform well, you can get raises and you can actually earn great income. And that's not common, in South America or Brazil, particularly where I come from.
So you had big dreams. Was it the mortgage industry or how did you get into the industry? I know the answer to this, but a lot of people don't know.
How I stumbled into the mortgage. I think most people that are in the mortgage industry, in many instances, sort of stumbled into the industry somehow. But one of my best friend's older brother was a sales manager at a mortgage company. And
you're saying school and college?
Correct.
Okay.
So he recruited me. He said, hey, Daniel, I think that you've got a great personality. I think you would do really well in our environment. I think we can train you and you could become very successful. Would you like to come and interview with our company? I think you would succeed. So I visited, his name was Daniel Maciel. So I visited him and he showed me around and interviewed me, and I came back for a second interview and they gave me the opportunity. And so that was the very first time that I had a real job. I mean, prior to that, I had done some smaller jobs, working at Ohio State or working at a bank or teaching tennis. But that was the first time that I had a real opportunity, and that's how I ended up in the mortgage industry.
And what's that like? Like, did you know what a mortgage was? Were you like, what am I selling? Like, am I selling houses? Like, what is that like? Especially when it's not your first language.
No, I initially did not know what a mortgage was. And so, but I learned very quickly, right? And at the time, I also had a very thick accent. And so it wasn't as easy for you to understand me. And I still have an accent today, but it was quite substantial when, back, when I was 23 years old. I had to overcompensate. I had to learn product knowledge a little bit more than everybody else. I need to practice the scripts, more than anybody else. I had to work harder than anyone else if I wanted to have substantial results. But I was always competitive. I wanted to do something and I had to, right? I didn't have an option. I had to work hard and I had to be independent and survive because, my parents didn't have the ability to continue to support me into my, adult life. So I had to work extremely hard to support myself.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that because I know that kind of all happened at the same time. This opportunity, the Brazilian economy, and you were immediately trying to find a way to be independent and self-sufficient.
When I first started at Ohio State, a Brazilian economy was 1-to-1, right? And even though my parents had the partnership and worked with Ohio State and were furthering their studies here, they were still paid in Brazilian currency. And so as the Brazilian economy started to go in the wrong direction, things became significantly more expensive for me. And I think a lot of people go through those kinds of struggles, right? Especially when you are raised, in a middle class, or in my scenario, potentially a lower middle class. I found there were many scenarios where I didn't have money to eat. I would search my car for coins, I would search my house, sometimes things fall out of your pocket, right?
And finding the couch, right there.
Exactly, yeah.
Quarters, maybe $1 bill.
I would put together $1, right? And that was enough for me to go and get. I remember I used to get a double cheeseburger at McDonald's.
We all love pizza, right? But you would buy like a full pie of pizza, for the week. Like this wasn't I'm sitting here, I'm like, I could eat a whole pie right now. Like that wasn't what was going through your brain.
I would live off of those, the meals, the Valpak or whatever they would call it. They're like 50 coupons inside, and I would separate all the coupons and find the
one
deals
free
on the
slushy,
pizza,
one
right?
fry,
I
one
would
pizza.
Buy one, get one free, or 50% off, whatever it was. Right. I would literally buy a pizza, and that would be what I ate for the entire week, right? I would have one slice of pizza per day, and that got me through a year or so until I found this opportunity to join the mortgage industry.
I know a lot of your stories and everything, which is, they mean a lot to me, especially with how close we are. But I think one thing that, looking at what has happened over the business over the last 10, 11, 12 years is the strategy. And some of those strategies, I felt like you kind of started right in the beginning, right? Scripting, like, well, you were, in my opinion, I'll let you kind of elaborate more on it, but you started those scriptings because you kind of had to. Again, English,
to survive.
You're not comfortable with English yet. And so if someone was to ask you a question that you didn't already have a planned response for, it could become not as smooth as a conversation.
It was all about survival, right? When I started in the mortgage industry, I had a few things that were motivating me. One, survival, right? Two, my parents, they sacrificed a lot, right, to be able to move to the United States and give me the opportunity to be here. That was motivating me because I wanted to prove to myself that I could support myself and make them proud. I had a thick accent, been given this opportunity because of an older friend's brother that used to work in the mortgage industry. I took that opportunity and I ran with it. Even though I had a thick accent, ultimately that became my advantage because it was harder for people to understand me. But I studied the scripting really well. I had the product knowledge down. Because people had to pay attention to me when I was speaking, they also were able to understand what it is that I was selling. That was important for me. I was so excited, to have gotten this opportunity to work in the mortgage industry. I got licensed in multiple states. It was a direct-to-consumer call center environment company where we did 100% refinance business over the phone. I was licensed in multiple states in the East Coast, multiple states in the West Coast, and even in Hawaii. Again, I had to overcompensate to be able to compete. I would come in, in the morning, and from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., I would call the East Coast, and then everybody would leave around that time. I would stay in the office, and then from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., I would call on the West Coast, California, Arizona, Washington State, Nevada. At 9 p.m., I would then start calling in Hawaii, and I would call until midnight. And so there were many days that I would work from 9 a.m. to 12, and by doing so, I was able to develop the skill set, first of all, of working really hard. Second of all, I had a lot of reps. I was talking to a lot of customers, and so I really practiced, my skills quite a bit. And luckily, the company that I worked for at the time really promoted, best practices and overall training. And so I was learning from a good sales trainer and developing good habits as it relates to sales skills. That led me to become very successful in that environment as time went by.
They were teaching the right habits so that you didn't, weren't trying to figure it out on your own, because we've kind of learned, if you develop bad habits, it's a lot harder to replace those with good habits versus if you don't have the habits, you just start with the right habits. And, it's always interesting to hear your story. And I love the one how it was you would get up early, get in the office early, and you'd be there until midnight. And it wasn't that you were calling on the same list. It's a strategy, right? So you can have the skills, you can know the product knowledge, you can practice scripting and all these things. But if you have those without a strategy, what's the point?
And
right?
that was so real because when I met Daniel, I remember being like, who is at the office till 2 a.m.? Like, what are you doing with a mortgage at 2 a.m.? And I had no idea what you do with a mortgage at that time. And he explained that. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense because those people are not awake until later in the day and he's calling them and people are closing.
Oh, Hawaii is 5 hours behind. Right, so you can call until a certain time.
But then afterwards, you're still working on paperwork or, inputting
and everything was
systems,
paper. There was
right?
no electronic signatures or things like that at that time. Some parts and pieces,
Well,
but
we have some LOs that I know that used to have to fax for credit reports, but we're not that old, So.
And then you decided, okay, I think I can make a career out of this, build my own branch.
Sure.
And focus on purchase business. So you had never done a purchase loan and you decide to just go do this?
How I transitioned from, the direct to consumer, call center environment, 100% refinance business to doing, referral based purchase business is that I had been doing the direct to consumer call center environment for about 7 years, and I was really good at it. I was either number 1, 2, or 3 out of 250 plus loan officers at the company that I worked for. And then I went to a mortgage conference. I saw a few people on stage, some of them that have been some of my top mentors even to this date. I remember seeing Josh Sigmund, Shayla, Rick Ruby, and Todd Screama, and they were representing the core. Josh broke down what his day looked like in the mortgage industry as a loan originator, talked about what the income potential had been for him. I was just sitting there thinking, wow, this seems like a lot more rewarding to build relationships with people in your community, build relationships that are long-term relationships with your clients, helping people get into homes versus just refinancing. It just really resonated with me. So I came back and I decided that I was going to change everything, right? And I remember going to the owner of my company when I was number 1 in the company, so I had a lot of leverage at the time. And I said, listen, I want to focus on doing a referral-based business. I want to go and do all purchase transactions. I don't want to do any more lead-based business anymore. And by the way, I need a branch. And so then that was well received. A few months later, I started my own branch of the company that I worked for at the time, and I hired a couple of people, and I started meeting with real estate agents and developing that referral-based purchase-driven business.
And I will never forget it because he came back from this conference.
2013.
He had typed up this business plan because he was going to do this branch thing on his own. I was working at my job, and he came back and he literally puts this big binder on the table and he's like, I'm completely changing my business plan. And this is like the day before he has to present it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Is this like normal to completely change everything? And he did. He stuck to it. He had a vision for it.
I'm going to share two quick stories about. One was about Josh. So the first time I met Josh, first time he met you was at that conference. You being the person you are and being driven and really just wanting to get as much information as possible. You kind of cornered it a couple times and just picked his brain, right? And he told me, he was like, God, this guy's getting in over his head, right? He's changing his business model like that, right? And he said that, I don't know how long, whether it was 6 months or a year later, after you had already made the transition, you cornered him at one of the conferences and you started, tell him about what you're doing. He goes, hey, I'm going to practice some of these scripts on you. And he said at that moment, he was like blown away. He goes, wow, this guy did it. And like 6 months to a year, he's like the scripts and what you were talking about, he was blown away. He went a full 180 of like, yeah, that's very challenging to start from scratch.
I want to kind of go from there on, like, you're building this branch, you're getting it up and running, it's doing well, and then you ran into a really difficult time. I remember this time because I was still working at my job, but I was kind of helping Daniel on the side, marketing stuff, no loan stuff. Talk about that. The company that you were with went through a little bit of a tough.
When I started building a branch, I hired, a couple of people, first like a front-end assistant and a contract to close assistant. And we started to get some good results right out the gate. About a year into it, when we were really, starting to take some good strides. At that time, I think we had around 5 people on the team, right? So we grew from 3 to 5 in that first year. And the company that I was working for was in a road towards, bankruptcy. They had some issues that were happening and they were going to be missing payroll. I was told that was going to happen, that payroll was going to, be delayed or, missed entirely. I decided at that time, couldn't let the team that I was working with and building take a hit, and I couldn't afford to lose them because we were building momentum. I didn't have a lot. I was just starting to make some money and save. I was writing personal checks to cover payroll for my team for a couple of months until, they were able to get things back on track. But eventually the company ended up selling and being acquired by another company.
And I will never forget that because the entire company, payroll was missed or delayed, but Daniel's team was still receiving a paycheck. And I think it ended up being like a little something extra for them, like a bonus in the end, because you didn't ask for it back or anything. But I will never forget that because you're like, you can't make people work for you and not pay them. We have to do this. And like, we were dating at the time. I'm like, this mortgage industry stuff is so stressful. I knew he was doing well, meaning like he was building. And then
we were building momentum.
Then
and this happened.
Yeah, and then this happened. And then I think I started with you that December.
You came in 2015, right? So the company was acquired, and we went to a company called PMAC Lending. We really started taking some really good steps forward at PMAC.
Yeah.
That's when I came on. You came on, I think, about 5 months after I did.
Alex joined us when we were at PMAC. We were building the team, and then PMAC sold to Finance of America, right? So then we went to Finance of America, and Finance of America was in the process of doing multiple acquisitions and rolling several companies to become a pretty massive company. And we were one of the companies that were purchased. At the time that we were at Finance of America, our team had already grown to about 20 people. We were doing a respectable amount of business. And we learned a lot in that transition because
that was tough.
Finance of America was putting things together, and now they've exited the mortgage industry now, right? It was difficult because we had a lot of momentum. We were closing 20, 25 loans a month. We got there, and all of a sudden, initial underwrite was 9 days, and resubmittals were 4 to 5 days, and we had to figure out how to close loans on time while having this very delayed, initial underwrite and resubmittal process.
I will never.
They didn't really have SLAs on it. They wouldn't really necessarily underwrite the file that was next in line, so we had to stay on top of it.
And I think this is so nice to talk about because people see this operations center that we have now, right? Like that has been built and they're like, oh, I want to build an operations center. But Daniel will tell you that was built at this really difficult, tough time. I will never forget, came home and he's like, I have to build an operations center. I have to do it because it's the only way we can control the timeline. So it wasn't because he wanted to. We would have just continued using corporate underwriting, processing, but he built this center and just kind of kept going from there. So like talk about that decision. And obviously it's to have control, but how did you know, okay, I'm going to do this because I'm a salesperson and now I'm going to help build operations people.
So again, the operation at that company was not strong, right? We were having to wait a significant amount of time for underwriting and then for resubmittals, and we had to make sure that we still delivered. But it was at that moment that I realized that I have to be able to control the overall experience from the customer standpoint. And so building operation was something that we had to do out of necessity, and it turned out to be one of our biggest advantages now. We spent that year and a half really having to build every little process, every little detail of what it takes to manage pipelines, right? There's a lot involved with running operations that most people don't know to be able to run effectively. Fast forward to where we are now, right, where we have 40 originators, we're closing 250 loans per month, this year doing $850 million in volume. Those principles that we had to build and the little details to control the overall customer experience are now serving us at a level that most people just don't have the ability to do. We have 15-day turn times consistently every single time. That's the average on all of the loans that we do. But it all started because it was out of necessity initially to be able to survive and continue to deliver to our clients and partners. And then it turned out to be a competitive advantage for us because when we then found NFM and transitioned to NFM, I brought my entire operations team with me that I had built at my prior company. And then we continued to build upon it. And now we have this incredible operations center, and it's one of our main competitive advantages. We outperform most companies when it comes to operations. Our operations is incredible.
Yeah, it's a team. I think that a good analogy, I think you've used this a lot, is getting operations on site and controlling the whole thing allows us to be on the same boat, rowing in the same direction, right? And so, when our underwriters, and our processors and our closers, they know our LOs. Our LOs know them. So you build that personal relationship aspect. Everyone understands we're trying to do right by our customers, trying to do right by our referral sources, and trying to do right by each other. Allowing everyone to kind of row in the same direction really makes things easier and faster within our process.
And I think it says something too about sometimes adversity, like going through it, feeling it and experiencing it instead of always like just running away. Because sometimes when operations is tough, or you get to a company, because LOs have that experience of transitioning companies. They've at least once in their life. A lot of people will just leave or run away. And sometimes that's the right fit.
That's correct.
But in that moment, Daniel decided to stay because there had been, some transitions and changes. Yeah. And he said, I want to protect what we've built and the team. Mm-hmm. And he kind of went through it.
I was told to stay. Right? And so two things, right? One, I'm very loyal and I want to make things work, and I'm a team player. And then two, I also listen to professional advice, and I'm very coachable. And my coach at the time we're 6 months into the Finance of America experience, which was very difficult because they were acquiring a lot of companies at the same time. So it was like complete chaos.
And that wasn't a decision we made, right? I think that was what's important on
Right.
that, right?
And so what my coach at the time said to me, and he said, listen, you have to stick around for at least a year and make it work, and potentially even longer than that. What I realized is if I was going to stick around for another 6 months or potentially another year, that I had to make some things work. The first step was operations, and then the second step was marketing, right? Any marketing support did not exist, right? So, and that's when you came into play, right? Because there was no marketing, and you had a lot of experience in marketing. You came with me to a conference. We talked about this, and you decided, wow, I work really hard at Victoria's Secrets. If I were to put the kind of commitment that I do for Victoria's Secrets, and I do that to help build out a marketing team or to support you, our overall opportunity as a family would be substantially greater. That's how we birthed, right, the marketing team.
I came in, and on day one, Daniel gave me a script, and he's like, you need to practice this. I'm thinking, what? He's like, you're going to call online leads.
Whoa.
I got my license, really learned the business, and I'm so grateful for that.
Your baby is marketing, and you're so good at that. That skill set that you also have is how to improve process, develop processes, and that was very important to our growth. Not just in the marketing, but we were able to roll that into sales, roll the processing. And so whatever you've done and touched in each department, there's still a part of you in that department.
If you think about most branches or most, big divisions, they don't have their own operation center. They don't have their own marketing department, right? And these things that happen out of necessity for us and that we ultimately built, right? And it was very difficult to do that, now have proven to be our advantage. Came to building a team, right? Initially, I just had a dream because I met Josh Sigmund and I saw what he was doing, and I dreamed of one day being like him. And so I had to build the infrastructure around me to be able to get to that point. Once I built that infrastructure, right, and we were closing 250, 300 loans, ended up getting there in a relatively quick time frame, right? Less than 2-3 years, we went from 50 to 300 closings in a year. Once I realized that initial phase, right, which was to really build something that supported that level of production, then I realized, wow, what we've built is really special. A lot of people can benefit from this. And that's when we started bringing in loan originators, right? Because we had built the machine, we had built all the processes, we had every little detail of what it takes to succeed. People were able to join and follow that structure and then succeed for themselves. And led me to the second stage, right, of where I'm at now, which is this extreme passion and reward to see other people succeed, right? The amount of lives we've changed, the amount of opportunities we've created. We've got 40 originators. We've got 100 plus people on the team. Many people who support their families being part of our team. Many careers that have been developed from nothing to making a big impact in not only their lives, but their families and those that they touch. And so being able to pave the path now for other people to succeed at the highest level is what really motivates me.
You have to let people grow. You have to support them in that growth, or they will want to leave. So
a lot of people in this industry, they'll ask me about you, especially maybe whether it's a recruit or something. And
yeah, there's definitely an image out there, Daniel, that's different than the real, the one we know.
You. And I think that, I give the same answer because it's true to me. You truly want to help people and you want to share with them what you've helped. The opportunities that you were given to be able to come from where you were, you shared that in the beginning part of this. And I don't know if that's what kind of shaped you, but that's kind of what I visualize is you want to give these same opportunities to people. You don't want to hold people back. You don't want to hold information, hold back skills. You want to be able to share that, collaborate, and just be able to help people get to their fullest potential. And I think that that's some of the best coaches in the world. It's the ones that can actually take that athlete or take that person and get the fullest and the most out of them. And that is, I think, something that you're very, very good at and probably one of the best I've ever seen, definitely the best I've ever known.
There's a lot to what you just said right there, right? But I consider myself very lucky. I'm so grateful for all the opportunities that I've had. I feel that I'm very lucky to be in a position that I'm in. And it wasn't easy to get there, but coming from nothing and being able to excel in your industry and build, this incredible company led me to a place where I was like, wow, this is unbelievable, right? This is incredible. I'm living my dream right now because I never thought it would have been possible. And so what's in my head is I need everybody to experience this. That's how everything got started and built. and ultimately led to where we are today.
I like sharing and getting a little bit more deep with you, Daniel, because we have that relationship, Alex and you, some other people within the organization, but you know, you're kind of like this figure out there that a lot of people don't get to have like that one-on-one time with and share those stories. And there's so many really good stories. I just want to tell this one, or I'm not going to tell, but I'm going to have Daniel. So like in high school, you talked about like you didn't speak any English
Right.
or very well.
I know where you're going with that. So when I was in high school, I barely spoke any English at all, right? I had just come from Brazil. My English was not good. And there's 2,000 people at the high school that I went to. I started to get to know people, and people got to meet me. And in the hallways, you know, going from class to class, people would say, "Hey, Daniel, what's up? Hey, Daniel, what's going on? Hey, Daniel, how are you doing?" And it all sounded the same to me, right? So people would say, "Hey, Daniel, how are you doing?" I would say, "Nothing." Or, "Hey, Daniel, what's going on?" I would say, "I'm good." And then I realized that something was off, right? So very quickly I realized and understood that the way to answer those questions, just to be able to not be backward, is that I started to respond to every question with just "what's up." Right? So people would say, "Hey, Daniel, how are you doing?" I would say, "What's up?" "Hey, Daniel, what's going on?" "What's up?" "Hey, Daniel, what's up?"
it.
"What's up?" That was all I said probably for the first 6 months. I was just say, "What's up?"
And I love that story because it's just like a little bit of insight to like being a kid in high school, completely out of your element, not understanding, and just trying to fit in and survive.
And I
things.
learned
But
that because that's why when I've gone to Brazil, I'll just be like, "To the bone, to the bone," right? You know,
You have such a great accent when you say it.
You know,
too.
it's I understand it now. I just role reversal on that part.
So, well, I'm excited. You know, I'm so glad that you took the time. I mean, I know everyone's busy, and you too, Alex. We're gonna have part 2 with Alex, and you know, maybe
Yeah,
we'll
looking
do
forward to it.
maybe do
Likewise.
part 3 with the wives too, because like
Yeah.
there's some great stories
Let's do
there.
it.
Oh yes.
So
Well,
love
there's
that.
there's so many more incredible stories, right, through this journey. So I'd love to get back into it for sure.
yeah.
It'd be great to reflect. Sometimes, you know, being here, kind of realize.
We just got to do one where we tell the stories that we
can't
can't tell, but we're
They're
recording.
stored
There's some
and
good
they'll come
ones.
out. So,
So,
yeah.
thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.